Hello everyone. How are you? I'm good, thank you. So, uh, we were talked about the medieval music. So this is the last time talked about the medieval Christian music, with the 14th century style of the music. So this is after this time we are going to look at Reformation eras of music style. So from that time, we are going to focus on the Protestant music style. So it is more contemporary. So please, please focus on the medieval music, because the style is totally different. So you can see how different they are. So I'm going to share the PPT for you. So today's timetable is this: the new developments in the 14th century. So timetable is like that, Europe in the 14th century. This is so important because at that time, so many changes happen. So, and then the Ars Nova, meaning it's a new method or new art. And then Guillaume de Machaut, who is the composer, and then Italian Trecento music, and the 14th century's Madrigal, and then the echoes of the new art. So this is the new style, new attempt to compose some Christian music. So let's beginning with the Europe in the 14th century. After the comparative stability of the 13th century, the 14th saw disruption and confusion. The economy and the population of the Western Europe, declined and destroyed by war, famine, and disease. Conflicts and the scandals tarnished the church, and the revolt challenged secular authorities. Yet, the 14th century was also the period of remarkable creativity. The desire to understand and the cultural nature motivated advanced in science and technology, and an increasing interest in the world, the individualism, and then human nature led to art and literature that was more true to life and more eager to please its audience. The polyphonic music of the time is characterized by interplay, a patterning known as isolidum, and a standardized form for secular song, and the later in the engaging melodies, chromatic inflections, more frequent imperfect consonances, and new possibilities in notating rhythm and meter. The rising economic tide of the previous 3 centuries reversed in the 1300s. Cooler weather reduced agricultural production, leading to the prolonged economic slump. Floods in the northwestern Europe brought famine in 1315 to 22, and 1 person in 10 perished. In 1347 to 50, the Black Death, a combination of bubonic plague, marched across Europe, wiping out a third of the population. Almost everyone, in fact, died in pain within days, and many of those left manufacturing and the trade deepened the economic problem. So the frequent wars, especially the 100 Years' War between France and England, poverty, war, taxes, and political complaints combined to spark peasant and urban rebellions in the France, England, Flanders, Germany, Italy, and Spain. The church was also in a crisis. In the 13th century, Europeans viewed the church as the supreme authority, not only in matters of faith, but to a large extent in intellectual and political affairs. Now its authorities, especially the supremacy of the Pope, was widely questioned. In the 1305, King Philip V, King Philip IV of France engineered the election of the French Pope, Clemente V, who never went to Rome because of the hostility there to foreigners. From 1309 until 1377, the popes resided at Avignon in southern eastern France under the virtual control of the French king. This period, known as the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, was succeeded by the Great Schism from 1378 to 1417. There were rival claimants to the papacy in the Rome, in Avignon, and later in Pisa. This state of affairs, compounded by the often corrupt life of the clergy, drew sharp criticism expressed both in writing. The 13th century Europe could generally reconcile revelation and reason, the divine and the human kingdoms, and the religion and the politics. But in the 14th century, people began to separate the science from the religion and to see different roles for church and the state, notions still held today. William of Ockham and his followers argued that knowledge of the nature and of humanity should rest on the experience of the senses rather than on reason alone, and should seek nature rather than supernatural explanations. Without denying the claims of the religion, this view laid the foundation for the modern scientific method and made way for a growing secular music culture. New technologies brought social change, especially eyeglasses enabled the aging to read. The magnetic compass allowed the ship to venture farther from land, and the mechanical clocks began to change the way people experience time. From a daily cycle of the taste and events marked by the sounding of local bells to a universal measure of proportional arithmetical units. This crucial shift was reflected in the musical practice, especially in the 14th century system of notation. So, scientists' reliance on the senses had parallels among artists and the writers. In their pursuit of realism and in their focus on the pleasing their audience, the Florentine painter Giotto achieved more naturalistic representation, as seen in the facial expressions, posture, and garments in the painting shown in this picture. And you can see this picture. The right one is by Giotto, name is Lamentation fresco. So you can compare with the left one, the before Giotto. So these are huge differences. Yeah, the right one is more contemporary. So this is the beginning of making a painting like that. So he created the sense of the depth by placing figures and objects on different planes of the picture space, and the beauty of the faces and the symmetry of the composition show an interest in pleasing the works in the dialect that reflect the daily life and portray people of all social classes more realistically than earlier literature that had done. So I'm going to talk about the Ars Nova. The Philippe de Vitry, the French composer, a poet, a church canon, administrator for the Duke of Bourbon, and the King of France, is named by the one writer as the inventor of the new art. In Latin, Ars Nova, several versions of the treatise from the 1320 representing Vitry's teaching, though perhaps not written by him. And with the words, this completes the Ars Nova of majestic Philippe de Vitry, implying that Ars Nova is the title of the treatise and the Vitry is the author. The term Ars Nova has come to denote the new French musical style inaugurated by Vitry in the 1310s and continued through the 1370s. So the new art proceeds from the two innovations in rhythmic notation described in the Ars Nova treatise and in treatise by Johann de Moor, a mathematician and astronomer as well as a music theorist. The first innovation allowed the duple, meaning is imperfect, division of note values along with a traditional triple, meaning is a perfect division. The second provides for division of the semi-breve, formerly the smallest possible mode of value into meanings. The resulting system offered new methods and allowed much greater rhythmic flexibility, including the first time syncopation. Around the 1340, that's Moore discussed another innovation, measuration signs, symbols that are the ancient ancestors of the modern time signatures. Understanding the rhythmic profile of the 14th century, French music requires some knowledge of the notation itself. So for now, I'm going to talk about the writing rhythm. So what made the new musical style of the Ars Nova possible was the set of innovation in the notating rhythm, innovations that underlie our modern system of whole, half, quarter, and the eighth note and the rest. The new notation requires a rethinking of the musical time. Remember that a century or so earlier, musicians of the Notre Dame school had conceived of the musical rhythm in terms of certain repeating patterns of long and short notes, the rhythmic mode. All 6 modes fit a framework in which the basic time unit or tempus was always grouped in threes, like a measure of triple time. Franconian notation introduced in rhythmic mode by using the shape of notes to indicate their duration, yet still relied on the same threefold groupings called perfections. As long as the theorists insist on seeing musical time as a succession of the perfections, each of which could only be divided in certain ways, many rhythms simply could not be written down, including anything in a duple method. In Arsenova notation, units of the time could be grouped in either 2s or 3s at the several different levels of the duration, allowing a much wider variety of rhythms to be written. The long, breve, and the semi-breve could each be divided into either 2 or 3 notes of the next small value, as shown in the picture. As you see, the division of the long was called mode, that of the breve time, and that of the semi-breve prolation. Division was perfect or major if the triple, imperfect or minor if duple. The terms mode, tempo, the time, perfect and imperfect are all derived from the Notre Dame and the Franconian notation and applied here to new but closely related use. A new type of note was introduced to indicate 1/2 or 1/3 of a semi-breve. The meaning is least in Latin. The addition of smaller values was associated with a slowing of the tempo, so that for 14th century music, the breve rather than the long is typically transcribed as a measure in modern notation. The 4 possible combinations of the time and the prolation shown in this picture produce in effect 4 different methods comparable to 4 in use today. Later in the century, time and prolation were indicated with mensuration signs that are the ancestors of modern time signatures. A circle for the perfect time or incomplete, a circle for imperfect with a dot for major prolation or no dot for minor. The incomplete circle C without the dot has come down to us as a sign for fourth time, for quarter time. Showing the link between these 4 prolation and the modern conception of matter. In Arsenova notation, note shape could indicate certain durations that remained unchanged by the note around them. Such specificity made it possible for the first time to notate syncopation, a prominent feature in the melodies of composers from the 14th century. Indeed, Juan des Mille wrote of the new system, whatever can be sung can be written down. That was certainly not true of the rhythmic notation in the 13th century, which greatly limit what could be composed and preserved in written form. So I'm gonna continue to talk about Ars Nova, especially for now, I'm going to talk isorhythm. So the earliest musical work to exemplify the Ars Nova are the motet of Philippe de Vitry, several of which appear or are cited in the Ars Nova treatise. Most are in three voices with Latin text, probably written by Vitry himself. His motets use a device modern scholars have called isorhythm, in which the tenor is laid out in the segments of identical rhythm. This extends the practice we observed in Notre Dame de Clausure and the 13th century motets, where the tenor often repeats a rhythmic pattern and may also repeat a segment of a melody. In the isorhythmic motet of the 14th century, the rhythmic patterns are longer and more complex, and the tenor tends to move so slowly in comparison to the upper voices that it is heard less as a melody than as a foundation for the entire polyphonic structure. So theorists of the time recognized two recurring elements in the motet tenors, rhythmic and melodic. They called the repeating rhythmic unit the thalea, and the repeating segment of the melody the color. The color and the thalea could be the same length, always beginning and ending together, but most often the color extended over 2, 3, or more thalea. In some motets, the ending of the color and the thalea do not coincide, so that the repetition of the color begin in the middle of the thalea. Upper voices may also be organized isorhythmically in whole or part to emphasize the repeating rhythmic patterns in the tenor. Vitry's motet Cum Statua Hugo Magister Infidie illustrate isorhythm. The tenor includes the three statements of the color, and each color is divided into three equal parts to fit the three statements of the thalea. This picture shows the complete color with its three statements of the thalea marked with the Roman number first, the second, and the third. So I'm going to show you the video of Cum Statua Hugo Magister Infidie. So you can see the music style is different, and you can listen, what is the isorhythm. The music is so clear, right? Well, what did you feel through this music? The music style is quite different by the the past music style, right? So the music style is more clear and more, more clear with the harmony and with the melody and with rhythm, right? So this is the ISO rhythm, so we can feel it is more contemporary. So I'm going to continue talk about that music at the time, in 14th century. The most important composer at the time is Guillaume de Machaut. So the most important composer and the poet of the French Ars Nova period was Guillaume de Machaut. He is supported by royal and aristocratic patrons allowed Machaut time to produce over 140 musical works. Mostly settings of his own poetry, along with almost 300 other poems. From about the 1350 on, he gathered all his work in the manuscripts prepared for his patrons. These collections show Machaut's awareness of himself as an individual creator and his desire to preserve his creations for posterity. He composed in most of the genre then current, from motet to secular songs, and a survey of his music also served to introduce us to the main types of Ars Nova composition. So this picture is about Machaut. So you can see the left bottom line, the elder sit down on the chair, big chair. He's a Machaut. So I found this picture from the book named A History of Western Music. And this is the picture, the same picture. So I'm gonna read what is the picture about. So in this miniature from the last manuscript of Guillaume de Machaut's works, prepared during his lifetime, the elder Machaut is visited in his study by Love, who introduced his three children: sweet thoughts, pleasure, and hope. The meaning is that he was a happy composer. He did so many things, so he's so remarkable. So I'm going to talk about the Machaut deeply because he's the first composer. He's the first remarkable composer in music history. So Machaut was the most important composer and poet in 14th century France. He exercised a profound influence on his contemporaries and later artists, and his music has come to typify the French Ars Nova. Much of what we know about Machaut's life and career comes from his own narrative poems, many of which describe events in the lives of himself and his patrons. He was born in the province of Champagne in the northeastern France, but probably of the middle-class family. He was educated as a cleric probably in the rhymes, and later took holy orders. Around 1323, he entered the service of the John of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia, as a clerk, eventually becoming the king's secretary. In that role, he accompanied John on his travels and military campaigns across Europe, describing these exploits in his poets. So from the 1340 until his death in the 1377, Machaut reside in the Rhimes as canon of the cathedral, an office whose liturgical duties left ample time for poetry and composition. Machaut had close ties to royalty all his time, always moving in elite circles. Other patrons include John of Luxembourg's daughter Bonne, the king of the Navarre and France, and the Duke of Berry and Burgundy. Machaut was among the first composers to compile his complete works and to discuss his working methods, both signs of his self-awareness as a creator. He addressed Le Livre du Voirdu to Perrone, a young woman with whom Machaut had fallen in love in his 60s. In it, he says he typically writes his poems before setting them to music and is happiest when the music is sweet and pleasing. The strong support of his patrons gave him the resources to supervise the preparation of several illuminated manuscripts containing his works, but the choice to do so seems to have been his own, inspired by a sense of his own worth as an artist and a desire to preserve his music and the poetry for future generations. Such attitudes, commonplace today, remained rare among composers before the 19th centuries. So most of Machaut's 23 motets date from the relatively early in his career. 20 are isorhythmic, based on tenors from the chant, and the 3 use secular songs as tenors. Like other motets of the time, Machaut's are longer and more rhythmically complex than earlier examples, and often include hocket and isorhythmic passages in the upper voices. Machaut's La Messe de Notre Dame was one of the earliest polyphonic settings of the Mass Ordinary, probably the first polyphonic Mass to be written by a single composer and conceived as a unit. Machaut apparently composed the work in the early 1360s for performance at the Mass for the Virgin Mary, celebrated every Saturday at an altar of the cathedral in Reims. After his death, oration for Machaut's soul was added to the service, and his Mass continued to be performed there well into the 15th century. Through the 13th century, chants from the Mass proper were set polyphonically much more often than ordinary chant. But in the 14th century, there are numerous settings of the ordinary text by English, French, and Italian composers. Some composed for the paper chapel at Avignon, others for masses celebrated on special occasions deserving of added solemnity. Most were set as individual pieces that could be freely combined with others in a service. Some were composed as pairs of the movement, and a few were gathered into anonymous cycles. Settings were typically in one of three styles. The first three isorhythmic with a chant tenor, song-like with the decorated chant in the upper voice, or homophony with all parts moving together. Macho's mass build on this tradition, but treats the six texts of the ordinary as one composition rather than separate pieces. The movements are linked together by similarities of the style and the approach, and by a tonal focus on D in the first three movements and on F in the last three. All six movements are for four voices, with the motetus and the triplum above the tenor and the second supporting voice, called the contra-tenor, in same range as the tenor, sometimes below it and sometimes above. So the Kyrie, Sanctus, Agnus Dei, and Item Missa Est are isorhythmic in each of these movements. The tenor carries the cantus firmus, the melody to the chant on the same ordinary text, divide into two or more talle. The contra-tenor is also isorhythmic, coordinated with the tenor, and together they form the harmonic foundation. As you see, the picture shows the opening of the Christe, including the first two statements of the seven major thalea, marked by Roman numbers. The upper two voices move more rapidly, with the syncopation typical of Macho. They are also partly isorhythmic during the second statement of the thalea. The rhythms in the upper voices closely parallel those in the first, and are virtually identical in all but the second and the sixth measures of each thalea. The rhythmic repetition in the upper voices make the recurring thalea more evident. So does the alternation of the sustained note on the first and the fifth measures of each thalea with the lively rhythms in the other measures. Such contrast of the rhythmic rest and the activity is characteristic of the Macho's block-like construction, and it suggests an architectural parallel, like the alternation of the solid pillars and filigree stained glass windows along the wall of the Gothic cathedral. To generate the rhythmic activity, Macho often relies on repeating figuration. For example, the descending figure in the second measure of the triplum, echoed later in both motetus and the triplum, recurs frequently throughout the mass, serving not as a unifying motif, but as a way to create movement. So I'm going to share his music. Guillaume de Macho's Missa de Notre Dame. The first one, Kyrie. So it is, as I told you, it is mixed with isorhythmic and the song-like and the homophonic like that. This is the new tradition at the time through the 15th century. So please focus on the music. Yeah, his music is so special and so beautiful. This is, new attempt with the contract tenor. That voices make music more plentiful. So, and this is not easy, to sing at the time, but they they sang with that difficult techniques, the, with the difficult rhythms and the difficult harmony. We don't use that kind of harmony, from the classical era, but I know, but contemporary music. For the contemporary music, we can use every values and every method, and then we combine to compose the music. But at the time, that was so like so a special thing, So because they didn't have a method to compose the music. I mean, they established good style, but still they didn't have a the harmonical system. But the music was so beautiful. That is so true. So I'm keeping going to talk about the Marshall's music. So the after Kyrie, the Gloria and the Credo with the Gloria and Credo with their much longer texts are set in the style of discant or conductus. Essentially, the syllabic and largely homorhythmic, rapidly declaiming the words in all voices are illustrated in the picture. So, in the picture, the word Jesu Christe in the Gloria and Ex Maria Virgine in the Credo. I'm so sorry, I didn't bring the Ex Maria Virgine, but just to look at the the Jesus Christe in Credo are set in relief with the long sustained chords, musical equivalent to the tradition in the medieval painting of the depicting Maria and Jesus as much larger than the figures around them to emphasize their importance. The Gloria is based on a monophonic chant, Gloria, that is paraphrased at times in different voices, most often the tenor and the contratenor, shown by the note marked with X in the picture. I mean the numbers, the marked in the numbers. The chant melody in this passage is paraphrased first in the contratenor, the lowest voice. Yeah, I mean here. I missed it. I'm so sorry. So let's see. So you can see that the X in the picture, right? So the chant melody in this passage is paraphrased first in the contratenor, that shift to the tenor and the return to the contratenor. The credo is apparently not based on chant, both movements and with elaborate passages on the word. Amen, marked by hocket and the syncopation in the Gloria and isorhythm in the credo. Martial was widely esteemed in his own time and for several decades after his death, exercising an influence on the poets and the composers alike. His works loom large because they survive, which Martial ensured they would by having them copied into numerous manuscripts. Too much music by Vitry and other contemporaries has been lost, so we cannot evaluate Martial's true place. His modern reputation as the most important composer of his time may rest at least in part on his desire that his body of the work be preserved as a whole rather than left to the change of the fortune. So I want to share the music of Gloria. So please enjoy the beauty of Martial.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
Now I'm gonna continue on Ars Subtilior. Composers in the later 14th century continued and extended the genre and the traditions of the Ars Nova. In a paradox typical of the century, the papal court at Avignon was one of the main patrons of the secular music. There and at other courts across the southern France and the northern Italy, a brilliant society allowed composers to flourish. Their music consists chiefly of the polyphonic songs in the forms fixes, especially ballad. These chansons were extended in. These chansons were intended for the sophisticated, the audience aristocrat, cradle, and courtiers, because it developed every possibility of melody, rhythm, counterpoint, and especially notation, which made everything else possible. The composer's fascination with technique and their willingness to take a given procedure to new extremes led music historian Ursula Guente to term this repertory as subtilier. She derived the praise from the treatise on notation attributed to Philip Pactus, the Caserta, a theorist and composer at the Avignon court, which observed that the composers of the day had devised a more subtle manner than the aging Ars Nova. The refined and elaborate style of these songs is matched by their wonderful appearance in some of the manuscripts, including the fanciful decoration, as you see in the picture. And I'm going to show you another picture in the last time of the lecture. So intermingle the red and the black notes, ingenious notation, and the occasional caprice that include the love song written in the shape of the heart or the canon in the shape of the circle like that. So this is so gorgeous, and this is so unique because the music is so wonderful, and so this style is so unique, you know. So I'm gonna show you what is the Ars Subtilior. You can see how the music is worked with this notation system.
Say
So wonderful, right? So you can see that this music specialty because I introduced this and I I introduced this music because let's say this music is not the Christian music. This music is secular music at the time, but my goal for introducing this music is that from that time composers or musicians, theorists try to make a new music style with new duration system, new notation system. So it's gonna be a the church music will be developed so much from this era. So this is the first attempt, and this is the first musical affairs by composers. So even though this music is secular music, the musics were composed by the church Christian musicians because they are all intelligent and they are all noble positions. So they can make a music with supported by patrons and the king or the church like that. So I'm gonna talk about the Italian Trecento music because I only talked about the French music because at the time French music, especially Notre Dame Cathedral music, was the most important because they have a power and they have a good system, technology, knowledge like that. So Italian Trecento music was, the Italian music was just starting their, a value, even though Rome was the capital of the Christianity. So let's see what's the Italian Trecento music. So unlike the France, which had a monarchy, Italy in the late Middle Ages were a collection of city-states, each with its own political, cultural, and linguistic traditions. Italians refer to the 14th century as the Trecento, and the Italian music of the period has a distinct character. So I'm going to share what is the Trecento music, but I'm not gonna explain about the Trecento music more because it is less important than Ars Nova music. So please understand and just feel what is the Trecento music.
The 1300s in Europe were marked by a rejection of the establishment in favor of a new, more secular world. Part of this was a reaction against politically motivated power grabs. In the Great Schism of the Church between France and Italy, and in the 100 Years' War between England and France. In addition, outbreaks of bubonic plague, which killed approximately half of the population, created an atmosphere of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. In tandem with the reaction away from the church was an exciting flowering in art, music, and literature, which drew artists toward new approaches in the arts. In literature, great writers like Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio described everyday human scenes in the everyday language of the people. Here's a segment from Boccaccio's Decameron. The tables having been cleared away, the queen commanded that instruments be brought in, for the ladies knew how to do the round dance, and the young men too, and some of them could play and sing very well. Upon her request, Dioneo took a lute, and Fiammetta a viol, and began sweetly to play a dance. Then the queen, together with other ladies and 2 young men, chose a carol and struck up a round dance with a slow pace, while the servants were sent out to eat. When this was finished, they began to sing charming and merry songs. They continued in this way for a long time, until the queen thought that it was time to go to sleep. In art, Giotto introduced perspective into painting for the first time since antiquity. In this fresco from the Bardi Chapel, Dante appears to be standing in front of another figure further in the background. What Giotto accomplished in painting, Pisano did with sculpture, introducing perspective to his bronze carvings for the baptistry doors in Florence. In music, perspective was introduced through the use of contrast, contrasting triple and duple meters in one song, contrasting timbres created through imitation and canon, and formal structures based upon contrast, like the characteristic florid melody sung above a slower moving bass line. Music reflected the cultural climate of the time as well. Secular music predominated, and the vernacular was used rather than Latin, the same way that Dante and Petrarch and Boccaccio were writing in the language of the common people. As you listen to the songs in this section, the Madrigale, the Ballata, and Caccia, listen for these contrasts. Changes from triple to duple meter, a florid melody over a slower accompaniment, lots of imitation and repetition, and the use of the Italian language. Ci vediamo.
Yeah, so for now, I'm going to show you one more Italian music at the time. And the name is the 14th century madrigal. So madrigal is so important in the 16th century because, madrigal is the term of the secular music with like, 4 voice. So in the 16th centuries, I'm going to explain in the next class, but now I'm going to just tell you, because madrigal is so important for the human being, that is the secular music to express their own characteristic and their own life and the emotions, not like the Christian music, but it is also relate to composed church songs because the style is shared together every time, like nowadays, our CCM songs are composed by the secular music, the composers. So they use the same way to compose the pop songs like that. So you can understand, they used at the time they also used the same method to compose the between both the secular and the Christian music. So this is a good example, but this is a quietly different from the 16th century's madrigal, because the 14th century's madrigal is a song for 2 or 3 voices without instrumental accompaniment. Meaning is, for the 16th century's madrigal is include with instrumental accompaniment. So for the 14th century's madrigal, all the voices sing the same text, usually pastoral, satirical, or love poem. So I'm going to show you a little bit of this video.
Dammi capello qua. Dammi capello. Dio ricovreranno col mio cielo. Dio ricovreranno col mio cielo. La paurella su
Yeah, so madrigal music is so beautiful and rhythmic and so human-like, right? Because this song is composed for normal people, not for the church. But still, music is so beautiful, and the church also used that type of style that after the period. So now I'm gonna make a conclusion. So as you see the picture, this picture, the shape is heart. It's heart, right? So meaning is that this music is about the love. And so this is so unique. So if you are interested in this music, you can find on the YouTube. So please search on YouTube. So so now conclusion is that, sorry, in 14th century, approaches to music had a profound and continuing impact on the music and the musical life in the later centuries. Perhaps the most significant was the invention of a precise and an ambiguous notation that could record a wide variety of the rhythms and allow the music to be distributed in the writing and performed accurately wherever it went. We now take this for the granted when we played from the notation and the sight read through unfamiliar music, but it was a remarkable innovation in the 14th century. Among its effects was that composers could fix their music exactly as they wished it to be performed. As the poets had long been able to set down their poems, leading them to take pride in authorship, as a few composers had done before Machaut. The increased interest in the individual and in the satisfying the human senses that was a characteristic of the age grew stronger in the 15th and the 16th centuries, and has remained important ever since. Future composers would claim credit for their work more readily and would remain anonymous much less often than was true before 1300. Apparently, a piece by Machaut or Landini was esteemed more highly simply because it was by such a famous composer. This is, of course, still true today for composers as disparate as Beethoven or Beatles, Justin Bieber or Beyonce, like that. So the interplay between structure and pleasure, so typical of 14th century music, has also had a continuing resonance. A specific structural device of the time, such as isorhythm and performance fixes, lasted only to the late 15th century, but the ideas of music structure continued and diversified. French structure, Italian smoothness of melody, and clarity of declamation, and the growing use in both traditions of the prominent harmonic thirds and sixths all contribute to the international style of the 15th century. The meters and the rhythmic combinations made possible by Ars Nova notation from common time to syncopation are still part of the music today. The creation of the polyphonic style centered on the melodious topmost voice rather than built around the tenor, exemplified in the Martial's chansons, undergird many later developments. More recently, many modern composers have drawn on music of the 14th century for sounds, techniques, and ideas. The structure artifice of the Ars Nova, isorhythms, rhythmic motets, and the notational and the proportional wizardry of the century of Ars subtilier songs influenced the composers in the second half of the 20th century, such as Olivier Messiaen and Giorgio Ligeti. The music itself did not fare as well. 14th century styles fell out of use, and the figures like Martial became best known as poets, while their music came to be considered old-fashioned in comparison to the new 15th century style. When first rediscovered in the 19th century, 14th century polyphony seemed harsh in its harmonic and crude in allowing parallel fifths and octaves, forbidden in counterpoint since the 15th century. But 20th century music used a wider range of the sounds and the techniques and helped to make 14th century music sound fresh in comparison to common practice harmony. Interest in the reviving 14th century music led to additions of the complete work of Martial, Vitry, Landini, and others, many of them first appearing after World War II. Now, pieces by Martial, Landini, and others from the 14th century are again regularly performed and recalled both by early music specialists and by mainstream popular artists and by the church musicians. So probably you can listen this music in church in the Europe, especially from the Paris, Notre Dame Cathedral. Even though the cathedral was destroyed by terrorists, they're around the Paris. So you can listen to music, and we have a YouTube too. So if you have a interesting of that kind of music, you should look at and you should listen the music as much as you can. I really appreciate the composers at the time because, and theorists, because the notation system was so much developed that the meaning is, from that time we can see, we can listen, the wonderful and the variety of music. So today's class is done now. So for the next class, I'm going to talk about Reformation era and the music. So see you at the time and have a great week. Thank you.